All right, Dr. Jill, I am so excited to have you here today, and I'm going to start already with a big question. I loved your book. You wrote a beautiful book, which I recommend everybody to read. And I'm a picky reader because I read a lot. And your book was one of those books I couldn't put it down. It's
Oh,
called Unexpected: Finding Resilience Through Functional Medicine, Science, and Faith. You wrote some of my favorite things here. Of course, you wrote about your faith, you wrote about God, how spirituality and science need to come together, and how important it is for us to have a true holistic approach to our health and to our life. So I'm going to start with a big question. Let's talk about God. Since this podcast is called Rebranding God, first of all, what is your connection with God and how your faith, this connection with God, higher power, spirit, whoever somebody might want to call, how this connection helped you to heal cancer at 24 years old, Crohn's disease, a hard autoimmune disease a little later, then being very ill, having severe reactions with mold, divorce after 20 years marriage. How did God help you in this journey?
Alex, love talking about this and love that you opened it up with that because the truth is, and this is why I think, like you said, the book and the title were so important because I'm an analytical mind. I'm a scientist, right? But so often we get in that realm, that left brain analytical science, and I'm all about that. But we think that we can't have the right brain, the intuitive, the spiritual part. And the truth is, they actually, as I talk a lot in the book, they meld better together than anything. And we actually can't be a whole being unless we address our science, the left brain side of us, and integrate the right brain, the spirituality, these two things. And what they do is they make us so much more able to show up in this world, because as you and I just started before we came on here, the love and the energy that we bring is actually maybe more important than our words. And to me, that is literally a download from the divine. Like, I show up every day and I know in my humanity, I'm limited by my brain and my energy and my, sleep or whatever else. But when I have the divine with me, guiding me, giving me direction, giving me hope, giving me meaning and purpose, and I can share that with the people I talk to, that energy is limitless. The love that comes through God in me and showing up in the world is limitless. There's no shortage, right? So I can just pour out and pour out and pour out and pour out and be filled again, and it never ends. So I can come knowing that that is something that will forever be replenished. So my own personal journey, I remember as a very young child, I mean, I would pray. I grew up in a farm on, one of five children in Midwestern, or mid Illinois in the, Midwest, and very strong faith in my parents. And that was kind of passed down through the generations. Now, if I'm really honest, it was a much more fundamental, narrow view of Christianity and of God than what I believe now. I see God as much bigger. But even as a child, I remember many times when I would just pray and seek this divine wisdom and have such a great sense of peace and guidance. And even in little, I remember like seventh and eighth grade, like, should I do cheerleading or not? And I'd pray about it. And then like all these little tiny little decisions in life, but really simple things. And I always felt the divine guiding and directing me. And then, life gets crazy in high school and college. But in college, I really kind of came back to that like center of faith was really important. And I started making a lot of life decisions through prayer and meditation. And as that, the divine to me has always been almost like a father or a friend where I can literally have conversations, and it's not one way. I always feel this. And when you talk about cancer, I'll never forget, like you said, right before my 25th birthday, I found a lump in my breast. I had surgery, and just a few, days later, I get a call from the oncologist. And she said, Jill, I don't even know how to tell you, but you have aggressive breast cancer. You're going to be in for the battle of your life. You're going to need aggressive chemotherapy, radiation, the whole works. And as you well know, because I was in medical school, this is a life-threatening disease. I mean, it's literally, I was with a group of young women under 40, because at that time I was 25. And I am the only one still living in that support group. So it's a deadly disease. All that to say, within weeks, I mean, I prayed and I didn't really know, did I have 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years? But through prayer, I started to have a peace, and I still didn't know what was going to happen. But I'll never forget that day. I'm driving in the car with my ex-husband. The radio's on, and there's some pastor or preacher or minister or someone on there. And he said, he was talking about another situation, but he mentioned this verse, and it's the sickness that will not end in death, but it's for the glory of God. And I remember hearing that. And every once in a while, you know, those things where you read or hear something, or a friend tells you something and it just hits you to the heart. It was one of those moments for me. And it was literally almost as if God spoke to me and said, Jill, reframe.
Mhm.
This experience is going to be so beautiful because it's going to teach you and show you who I am in your life, like how powerful I am to heal. But also, it's going to take you through an experience that's not going to be fun and it might be painful, but you're going to have a lesson that's way better than medical school. And at the time, I was like, oh, this sucks. I don't really want to go through it. But I did know, I believed that promise at that moment. And there was not one moment from that day forward that I did not believe I was going to live. And you talk about mindset and belief. I believe with all my heart that part of my survival was because I knew I was going to live, like deep, deep, deep in my soul. I felt like God gave me a promise early on, like you are going to live, but reframe this because there's going to be something here that's going to bring glory to the love and the purpose and the meaning in your life. And again, way back then, I had no clue how true that would be. But if I look back, all the education I did, all those other things, they paled in comparison to me going through this as a patient, because once I did that, I had a depth of knowledge and compassion that no one could have ever given me in medical school. So it was true. And then that was just the first promise. And the way the divine and God has worked in my life is he gives us this like lesson. And if you learn it and go on and kind of, then there's another one. And then there was Crohn's disease. And then there was, so it built on it. But what happens, at least for me, is I have this deep sense of meaning and purpose. And literally, Alex, I mean, I could have a life-threatening diagnosis now. I could have a dear friend of mine that, you know, passes away. I could have you can take any life circumstances and it could come to me. And I'm not afraid. There's not one thing, even my own death. I don't fear that anymore because I know that God has given me the resources and the tools, and that divine is always with me. And it's funny because what happens is in those darkest, deepest, awfulest times of suffering, and we've all had them, I am not unique. That is when I feel the divine the most close. Like I love those times because he or she or the divine, however we see that, God is near.
What a beautiful, beautiful story. And I love that you used the word knowing. You said, I knew at that moment that I listened to that verse on the radio, I had the knowing that I was going to live. And this is a deep teaching that is in the course, A Course in Miracles, that teaches belief is for beginners. Like when Carl Sagan, the famous scientist, was asked by a reporter and said, Carl, do you believe in God? He said, no, I know God. There's a big difference between a belief and
Yeah.
have this deep knowing, which leads me to the next topic, which is intuition, right? Because a belief is almost something that it's in a book or it's what somebody said to you, but a knowing is that place that comes from the depth of your heart. You had that moment, your intuition that you're going to live, because a lot of people could have faced a situation, and because a lot of people personify God, and that's a whole new conversation why
Yeah.
they do. There's this anger as God is punishing them, and we know well that this belief of punishment is what separate a lot of people from God.
Yeah.
And that's why this podcast exists. Rebranding God is to bring you stories like yours, that the biggest illusion of all is that there's separation, and in that separation we suffer. When we know there's no separation, the fear dissolves, the suffering, even into those difficult times, fade away because you knew how to reframe. So talk to us about intuition,
Yeah.
how people can really tap in their intuition, even if they have difficult believing that there is any God, how to tap into their intuition.
Yes. So, and I love where this conversation is going. Two things. First of all, when we have trauma, which I know you're a fan of helping people heal trauma, so am I, and we've both done our own work too. What often happens is we start to, or the system outside of us, and sometimes we call it gaslighting. Even medically, we can have this gaslighting. In med school, the framework of medical education where I went through, it was all left brain, all science. Don't trust your heart. Don't trust your intuition. God forbid you show emotion from a patient. You have this mask. You're objective. You're a scientist. You come in with that and you do not show that emotion and you do not trust your intuition. There's no value in that, right? Now, this is not true. But in the medical system, as I was trained, we were taught to basically throw out anything emotional, intuitive, use only science. And that's that left brain analytical. But what happened, so what I'm saying is my journey was like valuing my own heart-based intuition. And I literally went through medical school and it kind of trains out that sense of what's true and right. And I had to relearn that. But what I learned in the process of dealing with my own trauma was unless you truly love and accept yourself, and I came from this culture of like self-sacrifice, humility, deny yourself, put yourself aside for others. And that's all beautiful. That's generous and loving. But if you deny yourself to the point where you actually hate or loathe yourself, then you can never trust yourself. So the first step, and again, with the divine, the creator, I even call it in the book, the divine creative, because I feel like all source of beauty and grace and creativity comes from the creator. And so for me, it's all one and the same. And so people are like that, maybe conservative kind of backgrounds are like divine creative. That's like sacrilegious. No. This is God. He is the creator. He's the creative. He's everything that's good and beautiful in my life. That's where it comes from. And I love to call it the divine creative because it kind of just, our brain with some of these words with different religious connotations gets stuck, right? But if we can reframe it and rephrase it, like you said, it's the oneness is there. So back to the med school. So we got taught out of it. And then as I started relearning, like I'd have this intuitive sense of a direction to go and I'd follow that and use the science and it'd be right. And over and over and over again, that intuition actually guides me very clearly and almost 100% accurately if I trust it. And to me, that is literally God within me. Like we have this word Emmanuel, and Emmanuel literally means God with us because it's inside as we are someone that believes in God and practices, what we do. God is with us and guiding us. And that's part of the comfort that I had through the suffering and difficulties. I felt the sense. And to me, that intuition, again, whatever we call it, you can call it secular intuition. But for me, it's the divine within me. It's God's spirit within me, guiding me. And always it gives me wisdom. So back to the med school, I started to integrate this to say, okay, the science is great, but I'm going to sometimes follow my heart intuition. I'm actually going to feel with the patient. I'm going to be connected to them on an intuitive, emotional, empathetic level and really hear them and listen and then see where that guides me. And this intuition would guide me into ask questions or to go in, and then I'd prove it with science. And what I realized is the power of blending those was astronomically. I always say it's like the old analog computer is our analytical mind, like the old fashioned, maybe thousands of pieces of data. Well, now with the AI and the quantum kinds of things, we can do millions of pieces of data in seconds or microseconds. And that to me is the more intuitive part because the intuitive part taps into our subconscious, our historical experience, and the divine within us. And all of those come together and can give us way more accurate, way more instantaneous data to follow through. But back to the trauma piece. If we truly, autoimmune disease at the core, Gabor Mate talks about this, it's actually part of attack of self. So there's this piece of us with any autoimmune disease, and I'm one of those too, that actually doesn't allow or love or even hates parts of ourselves. And what I found is I can't really trust myself until I love myself. And the divine gives us that template because God loves us unconditionally. And that is the maker, the creator, gives us that map of how we actually treat ourselves. And then we can go into the world and shine that love onto the people and love people the same way because the divine has taught us how to love ourselves in that way. And to me, it's all connected to the intuition because once we love ourselves the way the creator created us to be, all of our parts, even the parts we thought we didn't like, then we can show up in the world with that divine love that is limitless and impact the people we come in contact with.
Woohoo! I'm high right now. I'm high in love and high in God. There's so many places I want to go with you right now because you mentioned parts. You and I are big fans of internal family systems, and because
Yes.
of course it's a beautiful, I guess, framework to approach trauma healing,
Yeah.
and even the concept of self-love as you work with your patients and I work with my clients as somebody with a very strong scientific mind as well. I had to find frameworks and ways to teach my clients self-love, because it's such an abstract concept. Because a lot of people that come work with me and work with you, they come from trauma. They never had a template of love, first of all.
Mhm.
Most of us came from, even when we can say we had good childhood, it still wasn't a template of unconditional love. Like we had to be achievers in order to feel the love,
Yes,
as
yes.
we know well, and that causes is behind autoimmune disease, is behind cancer, is behind a lot of the illnesses that we see. So I think just going to self-love, and you said so well, we need to accept all parts of us. First of all, I think self-love can be explained that simply. Love all parts of you, love the dark side, love the shadow, love the part that, love all.
Mhm.
So let's shift into something that is very close to my heart, which is women. Specific, I work with a lot of women, I work with men too, but a lot of women, high achievers, they're type A and type C, because they're cannot stop working, they're addicted to work, and on top of that, they're the people pleasers
Yep.
that say yes to everyone and everything, and of course they getting sick because of this, or depleted, exhausted. Why they have such a hard time resting? Why resting and relax, it's so scary? What's behind that?
Oh gosh, and again, this is near and dear to my heart too. I'll start with a story, and this is in the book, but I'll never forget. I went to a health entrepreneur conference, and the speaker was talking about addiction. And this is very relevant to many of our patients in that. But I will confess, as he started talking about addiction, I kind of tuned it out because I don't drink alcohol. I don't do drugs. Like in my mind, I'm like, I'm not an addict, right? So silly me. But I like immediately was like, well, this doesn't pertain to me. And then he kept going and he talked, and he has this passion for really showing love to addicts because it all comes from trauma and pain. It's just a way of dealing with pain. It's not like a bad moral failure, right? And I love that. And I agreed with that. But again, I was like, I'm not one of them. Wrong. The next thing he said was he looked at all of us in the room. He said, all of you in this room are addicts.
Mhm,
And I'm like, what? He said, you are addicted to work and
mhm,
your value is from achievement. And you're on this treadmill of achievement. And then the next high is achievement. And you cannot get off of it because you're getting that high from your successes, your achievements, your production, your accolades, and it's socially acceptable. So it makes it even more deceptive because you're getting accolades, you're getting praise, you're getting awards, you're getting success financially or whatever. And so it's reinforcing that. And no one even thinks of it as an addiction because everything's great. You have a successful life. And as he started to talk, I started to realize he was so right. And what happens is somewhere along the lines as a young child, and especially women, I think more than men, at least in the culture I grew up in, it's like, be kind, be nice, don't be angry, show up, do good, be good grades, be a good, whatever, all these things. It's be good, do good, take care of people, put yourself aside. Nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful, selfless life. But what happens is somewhere along the line, we get to believe, and this is the false thing, is that our value comes from achievement. Our value comes from doing, and we are only worthy of love if we have a diploma or a straight A grades or a valedictorian or you name it, any sort of achievement that makes us worthy of love. And that without that, we are not worthy of love. And that's the lie. And I was on that treadmill and I had the most amazing parents. They valued education. They did nothing to make me believe that I was only worthy of love with achievement, but somehow internally I got on that treadmill myself and started to think, oh, well, I must be more lovable if I get straight A's and then valedictorian and then med school. And so I was on that treadmill when the speaker got my attention and I started to look around and I'm like, wow, what if you look at any highly successful entrepreneur, business owner, CEO, I could even name some, and almost every one of them have trauma at the root driving their success. Now, it's not bad because they're making changes in the world. And again, I could name some big names, and at the root, and some of them have even admitted this, is really trauma driving because it's this perpetual treadmill to achieve the next thing. And you get this high from achievement, but then that goes away and you have next day you're on the treadmill again. So as I realized that, I thought, oh my goodness, I have to work with this. And I have done a lot of work, neurolinguistic programming, EMDR, thought field therapy, TAP, you name it, trauma work, somatic work. I've done it because I want to work on myself first. And what happened was I was working with a neurolinguistic therapist at that time, and we started working on this piece. And part of my therapy was sitting still, like being still.
Mhm.
And that was the hardest thing in the world. And what your question alluded to is what happens when we do that, because what happens is that addiction is a way to cover up the feeling. And up until around 40, which is when my divorce happened and I started awakening and doing this work, I had not sat still long enough to really feel anger. In fact, my first therapy appointment ever, I was, not joking, but I told my therapist, well, I don't get angry. She laughed at
Same
me.
here. I did the same thing.
Right? Like she laughed and I thought, what are you laughing at? I'm not an angry person, right? That was my identity. Well, of course we all have anger. That's one of the human spectrum emotions, but I had so suppressed sadness and anger because they were not appropriate. And the woman culture that I grew up in, that at the age of 40, I started realizing, oh my gosh, I have to feel these things. And as I stopped moving and doing and was sitting and being with myself, these emotions started to percolate up. 40 years of sadness and grief that I had suppressed really well, 40 years of anger that I had suppressed, didn't even know what it was like. I was like, as I started to feel, I was like, oh my goodness, I think that's anger. Like I started to identify it. But you can only go through and heal those as you start to feel. And when I first allowed myself to feel like sadness, for example, that was that first 2 weeks. I have never been depressed in my life, and I'm not a depressed person, but I like, oh, this must be what it is to feel depressed, because it was 40 years of sadness washing over me. And as I did with myself, and I teach my patients and friends and anyone who will listen, when you have that come, it's almost like a tsunami. You feel like you're going to drown. But as you stay with it and let that wash over you, and it feels so scary because you've never allowed it before, it washes over. And within a couple hours, all of a sudden, you're like, I survived.
Mhm.
I can do this. And then it comes again and it comes again. And as now I'm much more able to identify sadness and anger, and I welcome them. And I know that they're going to come like a wave, wash over me, but they're not forever. No emotion is forever. And if I can stay with that, and then I can be completely embodied and show up in the world in a much more whole way. Because when we're suppressing those emotions, we are dissociated from our bodies. And that's when we get sickness.
Yes. I love it. I relate to so much that you just shared because I start waking up and doing therapy at 40, and then I went to sleep for a little while again. And in the last 3 years, I've been very devoted to trauma healing, which I didn't even know I had
Yes.
trauma to heal until I end up in a very stressful relationship, and then I became addicted to work, to achievement, because I was so insecure. And I
Mhm.
thought if I make a lot of money, if I become successful, I'll be worthy of love. So I had this program in me that I have to work for love.
Yes. Yes.
And I also remember being with my therapist many times, especially in the beginning when she said, "Here's a pillow. I want you to scream your anger." And I'm like, I don't do anger. I remember to this day, I don't do anger. I'm not an angry person because I used toxic positivity.
Yes.
I
Yes.
was all about just be positive, which is something great that the personal growth and self help does teach us. And it's not bad. It's not to be used to suppress our emotions because it can become another form of addiction. I'm
Yeah.
just going to be positive all the time. So, what I'm hearing you say here, which I totally agree with, most people, a lot of women especially, have hard time relaxing, resting because if they stop, they're going to start feeling the emotions and they become more anxious. And so they would rather be busy and be doing things than actually feeling the anxiety. And I believe, and I would love your opinion on this, that being somebody who became obsessed about the psychology and physiology of stress that brought me to trauma healing now with my clients. I study anxiety and depression a lot. And I came to believe through all my research that anxiety is basically this protector. I call the anxiety a protector that is holding those emotions down so we don't have to feel the inner child doesn't have to feel like holding the beach ball in the water, right? Which a lot
Yep.
of teachers describe. So if I have to hold those emotions down all the time is going to lead to two things: anxiety, and then all the adrenaline, all those stress hormones that can kill us.
Yeah.
At some point we need to experience then depression to shut down all the systems. So it's an interesting mechanism of survival. um, but I find the anxiety, which it's prevalent in our society. All my clients come to me asking for help with chronic anxiety. I was somebody who lived with functional anxiety my whole life, but it was functional anxiety. I could just
Yeah.
function, so who cares, right? So I would love to hear what you, if you agree with that theory of how anxiety, depression, it's about holding all these suppressed emotions.
Yeah, it really, and we can't, like, we go back to trusting intuition, the faith, all of those things come from a fully embodied person, which when we talk about that, I know you talk about this with your clients. What that means is I always say I lived from the neck up before 40. I was all here. And this can actually, it's a beautiful brain, a tool, the left brain, the analytical mind. I love it. And it's a gift that, and most people have as far as looking at life, but it can be a coping mechanism because we analyticalize, I think I made up that word, but our emotions, and we try to judge or analyticalize. I always say there's almost like this judge in our brain that says right or wrong or good or bad. And that judge is constantly, telling us, and even the anxiety can come there. But when we start actually going down here and saying, okay, how do I feel about this? What do I need? And even further, so many women have become caretakers, and the society kind of teaches us to take care of those people and love people and show up, and all that's great. But it's interesting because when we are in the caretaker role, whether it's a romantic relationship or a daughter or a mother or a sister or a friend, or you name any relationship, even pets, and we're caretaker, that's actually a role of power. Now, we don't may think of that way, but it's actually way more vulnerable to say, I need your help here.
Exactly.
And many of us women who've been strong, powerful, achievement-oriented addicts, we've gotten to take care of everybody in our life.
Mhm.
And we don't show that vulnerability because that's actually weakness. And for me, growing up on the farm, weakness was like a mortal sin. You're strong, you're tough, you don't complain, we ride motorcycles, right? Like, it's all this toughness.
Of
And I
course.
love, I love that. That's part of me. That's true. But what I had to relearn in therapy and going through this was, like, literally in the very beginning, the therapist would be like, what do you need? What do you want? I'm like, I don't know. I've been so dissociated from the part of me that has a need. I thought that I didn't have needs. And guess what? My marriage, part of the implosion was both of us thought we could take care of ourselves. We don't have needs. And we didn't even know how, after 20 years, to ask a partner, a husband in this case, for what I needed, because that was so self-sufficient. And that made me feel powerful and strong and safe. But the truth is, as we do this work, we have to actually get in touch. So I started by just like, okay, with my therapist, I need a drink of water. And then I would grab the water and take a sip of water and actually show my body and my mind and my somatic system I could have a need. I could fulfill that need. Very simple, like a glass of water. Yeah, let's take a sip. So I need water, and then I would do it. Or I need to pick up a pen. It would be simple, tiny practice things. But what I would do is, like, what do I need? Because when you first start opening that up, at least for me, I had no clue what I needed. But then as you start to, literally to this day, Alex, on my medicine cabinet mirror, when I open it up, all my, hair products and things are in there. There's a little sticky note and it says, what does she need from me today? And
Right.
that's my reminder for me to say for myself. And there's been once or twice, perfect example, my training through med school and residency was, you don't take off work unless you're dead or in the ICU. Like, you work, you don't complain. I would work so many shifts with fevers and incredible illness that I can't even tell you how many times. You don't complain, you just show up. Well, now post pandemic, of course, we don't go in with a fever, but before that, that was the norm. And literally the what does she need from me today is at that level, saying, oh my gosh, you're sick, maybe you should rest today. I had no concept of that before. But as I started to be in touch with below my neck, what does my body need, and feeling, because what happens is our body gives us these clues, like heartburn. That might be a little symptom of stress, or it might be a little stuff. And what we do is we suppress, we ignore. And so all of a sudden we become very, very sick because we've ignored the signals that our body had been giving us. And I had cancer and I had Crohn's. So I had signals way before that my body wasn't quite right, but I'd suppress it. I'd go to work, I'd show up. And as we heal, part of this is actually going into the body, feeling the body, checking in. And the other thing I always say, I even write prescriptions for it and to myself, is be kind to yourself. we're so good at being kind to others that we sometimes miss what our own bodies need.
Beautiful. Let's talk about softness because this is something um, I've been working on myself in my own therapy, learning how to actually reframe softness is a strength,
Mhm.
because the softness again bring us back to our hearts, to our bodies. It teaches us to be gentle with ourselves because again, yes, I can be a great empath, kind with my clients, even an empath and kind to my partner, and yet not kind to myself.
Yeah.
And it hides really, really, really well. Um, so let's talk about this importance of bringing softness and how there's so much strength. It's like there's this big movement of embracing the feminine, right? And I think it translates back into balance to this fire, this achievers in us that loves to ride motorcycles and
Yeah.
work out hard. And that's so beautiful. I love that part of me as well. And at the same time, I was lacking this softness. So I'm learning. It's a practice every day actually to bring the softness. So let's talk about that. How do you bring softness into your life, Dr. Jill?
Oh, Alex, I love this conversation because I'm like, yeah, I'm a recovering workaholic and a recovering, like, I grew up on a farm. So, of course, interesting. I'll just go back there because I grew up on a farm. I had an older brother, 3 years older, and a younger brother, 18 months younger. So I was sandwiched by boys. And again, a lot of men on the farm and that kind of thing. My dad, and all hardworking and strong. And so somehow, once again, being sandwiched in there, and just the German Swiss work kind of orientation, there was this real, value of being strong, don't complaining, working hard, don't be lazy. Like all these phrases were like part of ingrained in my genetics, like growing up. So then I get out in the world and like we just talked about, like say I was sick in residency, I would never not work. For example, after my breast cancer, I got through all the chemotherapy, radiation, went right back to work, maybe a month after therapy was done. And I was so sick. I had no hair. I was so malnourished from the chemo. And I started having cyclical fevers. I would get fevers up to 101.5, 102, like pretty significant. No one knew, Alex. I want to cry for that girl because she was so afraid. She's like, I'm talking she, myself, right? I took off 9 months for therapy, for chemo and all that. And then I had to go back and I thought, well, I just took off time. I can't tell my attending doctor that I need more time. I just have to show up. And it was months of fevers every day. And I just worked through them. I was so sick. No one knew it. And I was afraid to say that I was sick because I thought that was weakness. I thought, and of course, like looking back, I'm like, oh, sweetheart, be kind to yourself. Tell them you need a break. And what happened was one day I'm in the ER. This was an ER rotation right when I came back. I passed out cold on the floor and I couldn't ignore it anymore. And that very night, I was rushed to emergency surgery for an abscess that had been brewing, probably the reason for the fevers. And the next day I wake up and I get told by the surgeon I have Crohn's disease. Like, no wonder. And literally right now at 47, I look back at that 26-year-old and I'm like, sweetheart, take the time you need. And I'm speaking to you listening out there. If you are doing that to yourself and you're pushing and you're driving because you think you have to be something for somebody or achieve, or you can't complain or you can't be weak, this is where the feminine comes in, because the feminine is kind. The feminine is gentle. The feminine takes a break and rest. The feminine is just, there's a sweetness, and that's not weakness. I thought it was weakness. What it is it's strength, because it's strength to say, I need a break. Will you help me? You know how much stronger it takes to say, will you help me? This is what I need. I
Yes.
need your help. That's a heck of a lot stronger than it is to, I'm fine. I'll take care of myself. I don't need anybody. Um, all of these things, these lies that we tell ourselves. But as we integrate that and we show up in the world, because who wants a friend or a mother or a daughter or a sister or anyone in your life that has no needs, right? When I have a friend that like calls me up and like, I'm so sorry to bother you, Jill, but I desperately can I talk to you? I really want your opinion. I'm really struggling. Doesn't that just open, like for me, it opens up my heart, like, oh yes, how can I help you? You're asking me for help. Like there's a beauty in asking others for help. And when we are so strong and so resilient and so self-reliant that we don't need anybody, which is false, right? We are taking away the gift of those people who love us and want to show up for us. And to this day, it's still hard for me to ask for help, but I'm practicing, and I'm practicing because that's this nature is a much softer, kinder. And again, we are much more human and approachable if we really have needs. And of course we all do, but if we actually admit that we're human and that we need help.
Mm, thank you for that. I'm right there with you. I'm learning how to ask because I'm a
Yeah.
caretaker
Yep.
by nature. And as you said, that it's also power. It gives us a sense of, oh, I'm worthy because I'm taking care of this person. So
Mhm.
it's our nature, it's my nature, but at the same time can become an egoic agenda, as we know. Um, so beautiful. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. Um, resilience. Resilience is something that I've been thinking about a lot because I think, in a way, we have become a culture that is very fragile in a
Mhm.
sense now. And I think we have become, because we suppress, we in this culture especially, there's so much suppression of emotions that we actually as a culture have become weaker, and we're lacking emotional resilience. So I was thinking, like somebody asked me in a previous podcast, what is resilience for you, Alex? How do we build resilience? And my first answer was, well, to rebuild resilience as a culture, I think the first thing we need to do is to learn how to sit with our own emotions and have the courage to explore what's present here for me. And I think because a lot of people are not doing that, they actually weakening their resilience and their ability to outstand stress and to thrive in times of stress. So how would you define resilience?
Yeah. So resilience is that I always love to go back to some of my heroes, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and then Edith Eger wrote The Gift and many others. Both of these were Holocaust survivors. And I always like when I read their stories, I'm like, oh my goodness, nothing in my life is ever compared to that suffering. And it's not always good to get into the comparison game, but I just want to say, like, even if I talk about my suffering or my difficulties, there are so many people who had it so much worse than me, and what I love is when I read their writings, these people who have overcome incredible odds, and I mean, there's so many other stories, like that, and what the commonality is that internal will to survive, that belief in something greater, that greater purpose and meaning. For me, it's the divine, and it's God in my life, as we talked about it, and that there is pearls within these difficulties with, and it doesn't mean I don't want to like over glorify suffering because it is not fun. But as I mentioned before, we're either just having gone through something difficult, we're in it right now, or it's coming up. There's only three options because life is full of uncertainty. Life is full of difficulty, and that just is what it is. That's just humanity. And the more we can embrace that and be expecting uncertainty and expecting suffering, and then when it happens, we're not shocked. We're not surprised. And as Viktor Frankl talks about, no man can change your mindset. So we can come at it with okay, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? How can this make me a better person? And if we're in the business of transformation, everything's a teacher. And when we look at it that way, so it's really just reframing. And again, I'm not saying it's not difficult. And I'm not saying that we should just suppress our anger or our sadness or our grief. We can let those go. But at the same time, we can also be reframing what else is here for me to learn and transform. And then through that, that's really, like I said earlier, because I've been through a lot of things and I continue to learn from them. I know there's not anything that could come my way that I couldn't figure out or survive, or even in death, I would be somehow at peace with that, um, because I've learned to transform the difficulties.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that resilience, it's that knowing that we have the resources, and especially when we connect with the divine, we have so much untapped potential. And when we connect, that potential is unlocked. That always gives us the resources to handle whatever comes our way. So that's what I
Mhm.
hear you describing resilience as. And it's, in a way, it's like a muscle we have to
Yes.
work on every day. But it starts with that knowing that whatever comes my way, I can handle. And the I, it's not the I, just the physical I. It's the I that connects with, because as you said earlier in our podcast, we're very limited
Yeah.
in just our physical body, in just our brain. We're extremely limited. And when we tap into the divine creation, the divine creator, as you described, is this field of knowledge that I learned so much. I remember right after the pandemic, I closed my business and I was really kind of in a cave and I didn't leave my house much. And people come and ask me, Alex, what's going on in your life? What's happened in your life? Anything new? I would say, externally, nothing is happening, but internally, I cannot even start telling you, because when you sit and you really connect with this field of knowledge, with the field of God, I call, the amount of knowledge that is there, it's incredible.
It is. It is. And it just brings a sense of, again, we can love ourselves and also at the same time have this deep humility, like our place in the universe. And it's so funny because humility in some ways is like people think of it as like a bad word, but no, it's just like the amazing vastness of God's love and purpose and meaning that he brings to our lives always humbles me because I'm like, wow, who am I that I get to experience this communion with God and this daily love that he provides an unlimitless supply. And that to me that's where like joy comes from, right? Because anything outside that could be happening. And it doesn't take away from the physical or the mental suffering, but inside, nothing can touch that place.
Yes.
Nothing can touch that. Nothing can take away my peace.
It's a paradox, isn't it?
Hmm.
Because I'm in the business of, I don't like to call business, but my
Yeah.
calling is to help people to transform
Hmm.
into their gifts, into their wisdom, so they are free. They're free of disease or suffering. And it's the paradox that we need to heal the inner child. We need to heal that trauma, become kind of the divine parent of the child that, as you said, sweetheart, you can rest.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when we really connect in the present moment, there's nothing to heal,
Yeah.
because, or there's the aspect of us which you can call spirit, soul, or divine selves. It's intact. It cannot be hurt. It
Yeah.
never loses. It's never suffering. It's
Mhm.
intact. So living with this paradox, I will say honestly, some days are easier than others, because some days I can get very caught in the small
Yes.
self,
Yes.
the victim, and it's like, why I'm not getting my way. But the moment I sit in spiritual practice, some meditation that I'm very devoted to every single day, it's the church in a way. I remind, it's like always perfect. There's a lesson in this challenge right now. It's all about reframing. There's a lesson in this challenge. What is this pain, or what is this lack of money? What is the challenge in my relationship trying to teach me right now? And when we start reframing that way, I, it's what I call quantum healing. It's like 1 year of therapy can become a 20-minute meditation, a practice that in 20 minutes I have an incredible insight that
Yeah.
can take years of therapy. So we really have access to this quantum healing.
Gosh, I love that. And I love something you just said that's so critical. I have used a lot of professionals in my life. I continue to do so. So there's nothing wrong with that, whether it's books or therapy or somatic trainers, whatever. But there is a piece sometimes that we think, oh, we need help from somebody else. We can't do it ourselves. And say we're stranded on a mountain by ourselves, we could still heal trauma. And I kind of want to speak that out because sometimes we forget that we have everything we need already with prayer, the divine, this, the times. And again, I'm not saying not to see a professional because I've seen plenty myself and I usually recommend it. But I also want to say that it doesn't have to take an outside source. You have what you need inside. And with prayer and meditation, for me, that's been powerful too, because I don't have to feel like I always have to call up or spend money on.
Yes.
Again, I'm always learning, so that's a good resource, but you have what you need like already.
And I think in a way we become, I like to call myself a way shower. As much as, yeah, people might call me a healer. You are a true healer, there's no doubt. But I think you and I are also in this knowing that we are teaching others how to access
Yeah.
their healer within themselves, because
Yes.
everyone has the power to heal their bodies, to heal their minds. I love you start your book with a great quote. Incurable doesn't mean healing is not possible. It simply means that there is not a drug that reverses the condition, which aligns with a quote that I learned from my teacher, Dr. Gabermat. He says, "You might not cure your disease as you heal your trauma, but you can still heal."
Yes. Yes.
Might not be a cure to that disease, but you will heal if you do the work and give
Mhm.
yourself the unconditional love. So, so much beauty. So I know I have a few more minutes with you, Dr. Ju. So before I ask you my final question, um, is there anything in your heart, based on this conversation, based in our connection, anything you would like to share?
Gosh, I just think the biggest thing is hope, for those listening, because again, if you're out there listening and you're human, you have gone through stuff or you're in stuff or it's coming up. And I just want to say that, like, you may look at Alex and I'm like, oh, well, you guys have it all together, but not, like, I just don't want there to be any difference between me or any of you listening out there. And we can all learn from each other, but you have everything you need and there is always hope. And I think the moment that we stop believing there's hope or there's answers, that's the moment we get, going kind of down. And it can be hard. My journey has been very difficult at times, but I would say the one commonality was the faith that God would guide me, direct me, not always heal me, but just always be present with me. And the faith that there was always answers as I kept looking. And I found those to be true. There's always hope.
There is always hope. And I love that you said that people might think we have it together. Let me share here. Last week, I think I cried almost every day. So no, we
Yeah.
don't have all together. What I say is we have practices, we have tools in our free will. We choose to utilize those tools. And for me, if I may share, one of the biggest learnings for me lately that makes me very humble. For me, humility is very important in this work, because as an intellectual, as somebody at times with big ego, my ego can run with all this knowledge and utilize with an agenda, which so humility is very important in this work. But I would say learning how to sit in this place where I'm trying to figure all out with my left brain and being able to say, I don't know what to do right now.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I feel a little lost right now. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
There is such a deep surrender. So that has been my lesson. So for those who think, yeah, I have all together, Dr. Jill has all together, that's my sharing. I have been in this deep place of trying to figure out, which is an old model. The left brain wants to figure all out, is the mind of the achiever. And I have learned that that no longer works for me.
Yeah.
That when I actually say, I don't know, and I sit in that place, it creates a space inside my body to actually receive. It's almost like I hear the divine or angels, whatever you want to call, say, oh, good. Now that you surrender, we can finally help you. And so that's something I want to share.
Oh, Alex, that's so beautiful. There's one of my chapters is called Believe, Act, Wait. And it's funny because I didn't really even realize this pattern until I started writing the book. And what that means is this is a pattern that I've used over and over again in my life. And it's this belief that something else is possible, that there is an answer, that there is hope. And all you have to do is believe that's true. You don't have to know the answer. You don't have to know how it's going to happen. You just have to believe. And then you act. That just means just do what you can.
Yeah.
Whether it's pray, show up, ask a friend for help, maybe you apply to a job, you do the piece that you can do. And it may not be what you think is enough, but do what you want. That's act. So believe, act. And then the wait, that's the surrender. That's just what you talked about. And what happens is in the waiting, so you believe, you do what you can, and then you wait and you trust and you pray. And in that place, all of a sudden, that's where the magic happens, because God shows up with more than you could believe, expect, or imagine. And something amazing happens that you know in yourself you couldn't have possibly made happen. But it's in that surrender, it's in that letting go of how it should happen, when it should happen. My book, I thought 2016, I think I thought it was now, how many years is that? I thought it was going to be the next year, 2000, and it didn't happen and didn't happen. And it was way longer than I expected. But what God knew is that I had to go through a bunch more experiences that were going to be included in the stories in the book. And I didn't know that. But what I did is I did surrender to the timeline, and it
Yes.
couldn't have been better, but it wasn't my plan.
Yeah, I love it. One piece that really helps me in this process that you just described, it's have your desires to write a book. I'm working on my second book and just starting, so you know that journey.
Yes, yes.
And we need to really learn how to detach from the outcome because, as
Yeah.
you said, you had a plan to write your book in 2016, but you needed to go through more experiences or meant to be in the book.
Hmm.
So it's the process of trusting. I find that that's where the humility comes in. Really, my teacher always tells me, my therapist teacher, she always tells me, bow, Alex, just keep bowing your head. When you go into your mind, she helps me to
Yeah.
get out of my intellectual, very strong brain, mind.
Uh-huh.
And she tells me, when you are so caught up in your thoughts, just bow to God, bow to your heart. And in that place, you can access this knowledge and get out of the head. And I'm like, and it's so beautiful because then we can really trust the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really because the surrender there is like this fear comes up, right? Like, what if I let go? But honestly, the surrender is where the power is because then we give it to God and God shows up even more than we could, like, it's way bigger than we could do.
We don't have any control, people. Just learn that. So
Yes.
beautiful. So, again, listeners, there's so much in this book called Unexpected. I'm going to put your book, of course, in the show notes. I recommend everybody to read your book because there's so many beautiful stories of resilience. Also, a lot of teaching in functional medicine and how a lot of you might be having certain symptoms and
Mhm.
have a lot of toxins in your body and don't even know. So there's that piece in the book. So I highly recommend everybody to read your book. My final question, Dr. Jill, and I will put all the details where people can find you, your contact information. Um, if this was your last day here in this beautiful planet and you're transitioning and you could leave humanity one message that you knew was going to be relevant to humanity and humanity was going to take that message in, what would that message be?
Oh, it's so simple that it's going to seem maybe boring, but it's love. Unconditional love is the healing. That's the core. That's the secret of my clinic. That's the secret of all my success is I just try to love people the very best that I can and get out of the way, pray, and then trust. But truly just like, and again, I am not perfect. I'm a work in progress, but every day my desire is to become love. Like, how do I show up as love? And when we do that, everything, that's where the good comes. And that's it's not easy maybe, but it's like it's a simple tenet is just becoming love in our lives.
Thank you. That's not boring at all. In fact, I find the deeper we walk in the spiritual path, the more simple it becomes. It is simple. We have to complicate it first, then to be
Yeah,
simple. We go through a
exactly.
hero's journey that we do this whole circle, this complex trauma healing and all that. And then we start walking side by side with the divine, and it is very simple. And I'm right there with you. Every single day, I'm working on becoming love. If there's one purpose for me in this life now, is just to become love and learn how to love myself and others unconditionally. So
Yes. And God basically just shares, love people like I love you. And if we really go to the depth of that, first of all, the depth of God's love for us, that's what allows us to show that same unconditional love to others. And again, we've got these human forms. So we've got anger and grief and frustration and all kinds of things that get in the way. But when we can truly get rid of those frames and those facades and just let God's love flow through us, heal us, and then shine that out to the world, magic happens.
it does happen. It's my own experience that I believe that that's the love we're all seeking our entire lives, and we're seeking this love We think it's a relationship, we think it's a career, we think it's money, we think it's the house, it's the vacation. We are desperate, we have been desperately seeking for God's love. And when we connect with this love, magic happens. So, Dr. Jill, so beautiful. I could talk to you for another 3 hours. I hope you come back for round two in this conversation. And thank you so much. Your work as, yeah, you're a doctor, but beyond a doctor, you are a true healer because it's your unconditional love. We know well that it's the energy of unconditional love and empathy that has the power to heal. Yeah,
Yes.
having the knowledge, of course, is important. Having the treatments, the protocols, we all know it comes to place. We need those. But I believe you're touching and even helping a lot of people to heal because of your unconditional love. So thank you for what you're doing in the world and for becoming another scientist, another MD,
Thank
teaching and sharing this message because we need more doctors like you.
mm,
It gives me hope.
thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for bringing this conversation to such an important level. It's so rare that I get to talk so freely about God, and I am grateful for the work you're doing and grateful for the conversation you opened today.
Thank you, my friend.
You're
Many
welcome.
blessings to you.
You too.